as she's getting herself settled here, why don't we call the meeting to order? And John, if you could call the roll, please.
Chairperson Kraus.
Here.
Member Tress.
Here.
Stewart.
Mark.
Mark Stewart. Am I
Say
saying it
here.
right?
Yeah, it just cut out for me. I'm here.
Okay.
Present.
Douglas.
Here.
Gottschall.
Here.
Russell.
Here.
Snoblin.
Here.
Perfect attendance. Everyone gets a gold star. Next item is just a review of our key points from the prior meeting that was in our packet. I have just one thing to potentially add, but does anybody else have anything that they would like to have Nikki and Julie consider for the key points?
All the credit goes to Nikki. She did a great job. I have nothing to add.
Okay, I do have one point that I think it would be helpful here when we talk about what is a mitigation bank. Nikki, to have, and I sent you an email earlier, adding a sentence here, just, and I think we can't repeat this often enough, that the creation of a wetland bank and the sale of wetland credits is a permanent and irrevocable change in land use. So that, you know, it's not something that we can rethink in 20 years and change. It's permanent and irrevocable. And I think maybe right in the first, what is a wetland mitigation bank? Maybe just a bullet point right there that would talk about that would be great. Otherwise, I think this is great and well thought out, and something I think we need and will appreciate as we begin to go forward in writing our report. Any other?
I'm fine with that addition.
Okay. Any other additions or changes? Hearing none, we have the minutes of our, we have statement of visitors. So it's this task force and the Park District policy to allow a portion of time at the beginning of every meeting for members of our vast viewing audience who would like to comment on something that's within the task force purview. Is there anyone from the audience that would like to raise your hand? No one? Okay, we'll have another opportunity at the end for comments if something strikes your interest. Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item number 2, the minutes of February 8th, 2022. This document was in our packet that was distributed nice and early. And does anyone have any changes, corrections, additions to the minutes of February 8th?
I have one small note, and unfortunately, I don't have them open in front of me. I'm having some technical trouble here, not to mention cats.
Maybe they're related, you know?
Sometimes they are.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you exactly where this occurs, but Sandy Hart is referred to 2 or 3 times in the document, and in one place she's called Representative Sandy Hart, and I think it would be more proper to call her Lake County Board Member Sandy Hart.
That is her title and position, so that's perfect. Any other changes, additions, or corrections?
Yes.
Corrected.
On page 7, I think 6th bullet point down under technical risks.
Okay.
The third one under technical risks, the first word there I think should be extent with a T at the end instead of extend with a D at the end.
I don't see where that is.
It's page 7 of the packet.
Yeah.
All right. And then the first, Mr. Slawinski continued on by explaining wetland mitigation risks.
Oh, I see. The third bullet. I got it.
Technical risks.
Yep. Although if we could extend the life of native seeds, we'd love to do that. But I think you're right. Extend. Thank you. Any other changes? Seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of February 8th, 2022 with those two corrections.
So moved.
Motion by Dewar. Who seconded?
Nikki.
Nikki. Any additional discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Chairperson Kraus,
Yes.
Member Treffs,
Yes,
Member Dewar,
Aye.
Member Douglas,
Since I was not there last meeting, I abstain.
Member Gotchall,
Yes,
Member Russell.
Aye.
Member Snoblin,
Yes.
The motion is approved. Someday I'll do a statistical study of who and why people say yes or I or okay or something. They all mean the same thing. It's just, I've always been curious about that. All right, let's move on to the meat of our agenda tonight, and that's a series of case studies around the development of wetlands. And Mark has been kind enough and spent a lot of time pulling this all together, so I'll turn the podium over to him.
just before you do that, I just want to make sure everyone's aware that the packet was updated. So I just want to make sure everyone has the updated packet for this evening.
Yes, and the update, just to be clear, the update was adding a presentation, the first presentation. Okay, Mark.
Yeah, so based on some information provided to us at the outset, there were a couple of area projects that were identified. One of which was a contact and some projects were identified with Libertyville Township. And Kathleen O'Connor, who is the Libertyville Township Supervisor, has been gracious enough to join us tonight and talk about her experiences. And she's been through this three times and is in the midst of doing it, I believe, again. And we're indeed interested in hearing from her. We've kind of heard about wetland banking and these projects from kind of the other side of the table, and Kathleen gives us the opportunity to perhaps put ourselves into her shoes and kind of gain the opposite perspective, the perspective of the landowner or the land steward and whatnot. And so pleased to have her join us. Kathleen, and I ask this question somewhat selfishly because I'd prefer not to drive my presentations, which are coming. Do you want us to move you to be a host or for this, or would you like John or someone here at the Park District to key your pages for you?
I'm fine with someone just keying the pages. I kind of, I'll be able to tell you to move forward, so that works out well.
Okay. So can you post the presentation for Kathleen, John?
Yeah, and we'll have Jeff share his screen and pull that up, and then he'll bring that up or advance it as she.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, go ahead. You can move it to the next slide. So my name is Kathleen O'Connor. I'm the supervisor for Libertyville Township. And just to give you a little bit of background, Libertyville Township is one of 5 townships in the state of Illinois that has an open space district. Ours was approved in 1985. It was a contentious experience, I would say. There was a lot of money that was spent in litigation. There was an initial referendum that was passed that would allow us to purchase land. A second referendum in the 90s failed. And so as a result, the township has limited funds for the maintenance and restoration of our 1,500 acres of open space. And some of that space is high quality areas that's been designated Illinois Nature Preserve or buffer. We have farm license agreements on this land, which generates revenue for us. And the land is our primary goal with our open space district is to restore it to a natural area. And so when the original bond referendum passed, the state of Illinois allowed us to keep, when the bond matured, allowed us to keep the funds that were remaining, and we were not required to distribute those back. So that provided us seed money. And why that was important is we don't have a separate tax levy for our open space district. Our levy is small. It's approximately 3% of the entire property tax bill. Libertyville Township's levy last year or this year was about $2 million. In that, that covers our general assistance, our emergency assistance programs, our primary mandate that we're to provide for the citizens of Libertyville Township. And so we have this high quality 1,500 acres of land. And one of the ways that we've explored to steward and restore that land that has worked for us has been wetland mitigation banks. And so, Libertyville Township is small. We have 3 full-time employees that take care of our open space district. We do pay for some of our expenses out of our levied funds, out of our town funds. That's our compensation for our employees, any professional services related to restoration activities on our open space, and then any equipment purchases. And that's about $350,000 a year. Then out of our open space fund, our non-levied fund, we keep those funds in reserved for major land restoration or trail projects. So because of wetland mitigation bank, we currently have about $2 million in that fund. Steve, I heard him make a point earlier that, once you develop a wetland mitigation bank, that's the land use in perpetuity. That fits nicely for us because our goal has been restoration. And so when we look at our 1,500 acres of land, we look at the restoration potential. We look at, by restoring it, what type of flooding mitigation or improved stormwater management opportunities are there? Is it in close proximity to other areas that we've restored? Our neighborhoods, like right now, the mitigation bank, we're in the process of going through the permit process. One of the reasons why we've identified it is because of the flooding that's occurred to the south of that site. So in addition to restoration, we look at how that land can function in terms of green infrastructure for us. Wetland mitigation banks are unique because it helps us achieve 2 goals. It allows us to restore that land. It allows us to, minimize stormwater issues, and it generates revenue. And so for a small taxing body like ourselves, who's, the reason why that initial open space district was created was for the preservation of land, it's kind of a win-win situation. Now, we have had a couple of banks. We had one that was offsite mitigation, and that is on a property north of Libertyville Township. Then we have another bank that's on the west side of the township by Carmel High School that's surrounded by homes that generated a significant amount of money for the township and created a trail through the site. The site I'm going to talk about today is our Atkinson Road site. And I'm going to show you some pictures. That process started in 2008, 2009 in terms of the permitting of that site. And it was 80 acres. And Jeff, you could move it to the next slide if you would. It was 80 acres. It was completely covered with buckthorn. We had an invasive species. It's just north of Atkinson Road, and it is west of the tollway. So it's right behind the Abbott complex on the other side of the tollway. Atkinson Road was experiencing a ton of flooding. It was creating unsafe travel conditions. This trail that went through this 80-acre property was a path that was used by students getting to school. And it had just sit there since the 80s, since the time the township had acquired it. So now I'm going to show you some photos of what the site looked like initially. So Jeff, go ahead and you can move it forward. This is the path that the kids would travel through. And so you can see it was completely covered with buckthorn. Really, really not a safe situation for a variety of reasons. This was the condition of the road on Atkinson Road, and a lot of it had to do with the flooding that was occurring. It was just deteriorating. You can see the overgrowth in that site. And so there was just a lot of factors that the township went into in terms of deciding whether we were going to move forward with a mitigation bank. Now, we are not, so what happened for us, because we have such a small staff and we don't have the resources, we engaged a firm called Land and Water Resources to serve as the mitigation banker. Jeff, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, they assumed, so what happens is when you, and you probably already know all this, but you know, there's financial risk involved in creating a wetland mitigation bank. And the township really was not in a position, because we weren't able to do any of the work in-house, to take this on by ourselves. So what happened was we had engaged Land and Water Resources. They had actually done 2 previous banks for the township. They assumed all the financial risk. They were responsible for the restoration of the site. They were responsible for the selling and the reporting of the credits. They were responsible for meeting the threshold requirements of the bank. And then they were responsible for keeping that bank until it met all the thresholds and was able, they received permission to turn the bank back over to us. So the township entered into a contract. We received a small percentage of what the credits were in terms of what they were selling for. I think it was approximately $6,000 an acre we were getting. But once that bank, the credits hit a certain threshold, that generated a significant amount of money for the township. And why you can see it was important is if you look at those pre-site conditions, you know, if our long-term goal was to restore that area and really address the stormwater issues that were going on out there, that was going to be a lot of financial risk for us. And we just were not in the position to take that on. So for us, you know, the benefit was we were going to get a site restored. That fit into our long-term goal in terms of our open space district. It was going to generate revenue. It was going to help the road issues on Atkinson Road. And we were going to have a safe trail for students to travel to and from school. The other thing that you can't see with this site is the homes to the east of the site and to the north probably are sold in the range of $650,000 to $800,000 to $900,000. So it wasn't. It's an area that there's the property values are strong there, and this has really been viewed as a neighborhood amenity now that it's gone through the restoration process. When the bank was approved, we were required to put about $25,000 aside that was earmarked specifically for this site. You can go ahead, Jeff, to the next slide. You know, and when you think about restoration, it requires a lot of patience. It's not a pretty process. You know, people tend to think, oh, we're going to restore the land, it's going to look great. It can take years for it to look great. And that's one of the hardships about this is, you know, it can be a lengthy permitting process. The construction of the bank is unappealing. There's a lot of time that has to be spent communicating with neighbors. That can be frustrating for folks. The site following the restoration may look weedy, unmaintained, and it can take a considerable amount of time to become established. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is that the bank has to meet certain thresholds. Once those thresholds are met, then the Army Corps of Engineers will give you permission and release those credits to be sold. So, you know, there's some managing of bureaucracy with it, and that can require patience as well. But going back to the original point, for us, it was a really appealing process because it generated revenue, it restored our property that we had limited resources to do, and it addressed a stormwater issue that was problematic on a road. Jeff, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is just another picture of, you get an idea of the homes that are in the area, and then part of the restoration process. that site was complete. If you remember from one of the original photos, that area that you're looking at now was completely covered with buckthorn. And now it's just, you know, we're able to open it up. Go ahead, you can go to the next slide. And this is what I'm talking about. It takes a while for the site to be established. So if you look at this time stamp on those photos, the one in 2009, the one in 2014, you know, it is, it requires patience, and but it's well worth it in the end. It was well worth it in the end for us. Go ahead, Jeff, to the next one. Part of it, the site is trying to figure out, because you have to maintain certain thresholds. One of the challenges for Land and Water Resources was, how do we keep the site wet enough, long enough to meet the Corps' requirements? And so sometimes, you know, you have to go back in. We've had to go back in and address some of those issues in order to meet those requirements. You know, go ahead, you can go to the next slide. Now, in terms of cost and the benefit for the long-term cost, you know, now that property is totally turned over to us. We generated close to $1 million in revenue on that site. I'm not even sure how much the banker earned, but for us, that was huge. You know, that was 80 acres that was covered in buckthorn. It generated close to $1 million. We had no cost involved in terms of the restoration of the site. We also had a trail that was improved as part of that process. Right now that it's turned over, we'll probably spend, because we're able to do it in-house, probably about $500 a year annually on herbicide to manage invasive species. If we contract that out, that would probably cost us between $15,000 to $20,000 a year. We try and do as much in-house as possible. The other thing is that we'll have to conduct prescribed burns. We do that on all of our open space. We would, you know, depending on what's going on out there, it would probably be every 2 to 3 years. Given the fact that there are the close proximity to homes on that site, it's most likely that we would contract that work out as well. And we would expect, based on what we spent on our Canterbury site, that cost right now would be about $20,000 every couple of years to conduct those prescribed burns. Trail maintenance is handled by staff, and we probably spend about $300 a year in trail screenings. And we have 3 full-time people that manage it, but there would have been no way for us to generate that type of revenue through our farm license agreements, even through a tax levy that we were able to generate for our open space district. Now, our next project that we're looking at is on the corner of, and the bottom is just a copy, a printout of our site management plans if you ever want to take a look at that. You can go ahead and click the next slide if you want. This just gives you an idea of our prescribed burns and how we handle that. What's really beautiful about our Atkinson Road site is that because the area was so covered in buckthorn, people were not able to see the oak knoll that was out there, and it really has had some long-term benefits. If you go to the next slide, Jeff, I can show you that. So the site has been completely restored with high quality native plant species. The health of the oak knoll has improved dramatically. As I mentioned, the site generated close to $1 million. You know, in addition to the $25,000 I had talked about earlier that was earmarked, this $950,000 was strictly for the credits that were sold. We have improved stormwater storage. We have halted flooding of Atkinson Road and the adjacent neighborhood. We have created 50 acres of wetland that's on approximately 62% of the site. We have 1.1 miles of trail for biking, hiking, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, and bird watching. So even though it's a wetland mitigation bank, there are still opportunities for passive and active recreation. Those just have to be identified up front as part of the process. It's improved wildlife habitat, it's improved plant species, it's actually improved the quality of life for the people that live around there. I mean, it took a lot of time in terms of public education and outreach to explain to folks why we were doing what we were doing. But now people have told us that they actually moved there because of this property, because it's protected in perpetuity. So it's now viewed as a asset once people were able to kind of live through and struggle through the actual construction of the bank. Now, as a result of this process, and because of our couple of other banks, and because we've had more experience, the township is now assuming more role in another potential wetland mitigation bank. But Jeff, I'm going to have you go through a couple more of the slides so folks can see what this site looks like now compared to those first pictures that we showed you earlier. So it's a completely different experience out there. The health of the land is completely different. The experience of going through a trail has changed. And so it was one of those unique opportunities that really checked a lot of boxes for us, and improved just the overall quality of life of just for employees, even driving to Abbott because of that road. That road was a mess prior to this land being restored. And the reason was because we were able to keep so much more water on that site that there were just more benefits that, to be quite honest with you, than we kind of underestimated prior to the start of this project. The other project that we're going to explore right now is in agriculture. And this was 300 acres of land that is on Casey Road, the north end of Libertyville Township. And we've been taking that land out of production slowly. And we will never take a parcel out of production until we have identified a funding source for us. So some of those 300 acres, we were able to get other grants. The corner of 45 and Casey, after we had met with a couple of engineers, and just based on our previous experience, we realized it was a nice site for a wetland mitigation bank. And we're doing it for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is there's a ton of flooding off of that crosses Casey Road and travels down to a neighborhood south of Casey Road. It's been a source for a lot of our neighbors. We've received a lot of complaints over it. But for us to restore this would be incredibly expensive. So what we're doing is we're assuming more of the financial risk in that bank. And what I mean is we have paid for the engineering for the prospectus. We have paid for the engineering for the development of the banking instrument. We will assume more of the construction costs. We'll be doing the monitoring of the site. What we have to contract out for is someone to help us sell the credits, report the credits, and monitor that threshold so that we can make sure that site meets the requirements of the Army Corps of Engineers. Right now, we're in the final stage of the permitting process, so we're hopeful that that land is approved and that we can start that bank. Right now, we have an ag license agreement. There's traditional farming that's going on out there. One of the problems we've had is we've lost a ton of soil out there. There's a huge erosion issue. And when it rains, it just sheet drains across those fields, across Casey Road, and then downstream. It's a problem with snow as well. But what we're hoping is because we've been able to assume more of the financial risk, we will generate a lot of revenue for the open space district. When I took office, there was a ton of legislation that addressed, the possibility of abolishing township government. And one of my concerns was we needed seed money to make sure that whoever, if that were to go through, there would be funds available that would follow that land. And so I personally wanted to make sure that we had sufficient funds, because when you have lands that are dedicated Illinois nature preserves or lands that have already been identified and protected as wetlands, you have a financial obligation to make sure that continues. So wetland mitigation banks have created revenue sources that we would not be able to secure on our own. Grants wouldn't be able to achieve what a wetland mitigation bank has done for us on multiple levels. So that's just kind of a snapshot of what we've done, why we've done it. I'd be happy to entertain any questions. I did put on the slide a link to our site management plan. We have site management plans on all our properties, and that it kind of will give you a general idea of what we do, how we do it, how often we do it. And you can compare it to the other properties that we own. It's just been a really nice fit for us. And, you know, we hope that, you know, this is probably the last property that will be able to do it. Because, you know, of the topography of the land, and it just seems like it will work well. You know, one of the things we haven't wanted to do, because our long-term goal is restoration, is force a bank on a site. And so we've always tried to identify parcels that would complement the other restoration that's going on in the area. So that's it. If anybody has any questions or comments, I hope that that information was helpful. It was what you were expecting.
Kathleen, this is Nikki Snoblin. First, I want to say I can attest to the beauty and functionality of that preserve. I live on Atkinson Road east of Waukegan Road, and it's one of our go-to spots for walking or riding our bikes. The trails are wonderful. There was one day I was down there and there were a number of I'm not too much of a wildlife person. They were either cranes or herons in the field there, and every car that went by slowed down or stopped so that people could look at them. It was it's just beautiful out there, and the trails are really nice too. I wonder if you could enlarge a little bit upon the risk, the financial risks, and that you refer to in developing it, that you said that the company you hired for the Atkinson Road project absorbed the risk, and that you were going to bear the risk on this new one. So that's the risk. I assume that you're putting a lot of money into developing the project, and then you have to.
Well, so right. So you're
criteria.
Right. So I'm sorry to interrupt. So what happens is, you know, you're restoring the land, and it has to function like a wetland mitigation bank. So a couple of things has to occur. It has to meet certain thresholds that the Army Corps of Engineers has set and the IRT has set. And so that's weather dependent. You know, if it doesn't rain, if there's a drought a year or two, you're not going to have that opportunity to meet the threshold. Then you're not going to be given permission to release those credits to sell. It's market driven. You know, right now there aren't a lot of wetland mitigation credits in our area, in Libertyville Township area. And so the value of those credits are higher. But if there's not a lot of construction, or if the market is flooded with credits, you may not get the price that you had hoped. So and that's what I mean by financial risk. For us, because we know now, have a better understanding of what's required, and we have more confidence in terms of being able to assume that risk. And really for us, because, you know, our goal is to restore it anyway, even if we're not able to sell all of the credits, we'll at least recoup our expenses in terms of the restoration cost, maybe without getting that bump in terms of additional revenue. And so, that's what I mean by, you know, assuming that financial risk. You know, you're not guaranteed that you're going to get, you know, or that we're going to get $60,000 of wetland mitigation credits sold. We could get more than that, you know, there could be less. It just depends on what's going on with the market at that time. So, and it depends on how long it can take to get that bank to function as it's, you know, permitted to. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And just let's see, I think you said that site was, I believe you said 63 acres of wetland.
Yeah, it's 63% of the site now is wetlands.
Oh,
it's
okay.
about 50 acres of an 80-acre site. So sometimes what happens is you're going to be required, or I shouldn't say you. Sometimes what has happened for us is that there are areas of that property that we have been required to restore, even though we couldn't sell them as part of the credits. But that was a non-issue for us because those areas are going to be restored anyway. And we would, commit to that up front because that's our long-term goal. Our long-term goal is to restore these properties, improve the land health, improve the stormwater management of the sites, improve the plant species that are out there, the wildlife that's out there. So the Corps' goals and ours kind of fit nicely. And so that's why it has been a good fit for the township.
Okay, and I'm sorry, one final question. In what year did you complete the sale of credits, assuming you have completed it?
For the Atkinson site?
Yes.
I think we got our last check in, I kind of get my time confused because of COVID, but I think it was December 2020 that those last credits were sold.
Okay, thank you.
Kathleen, George Russell, could you comment a little further or talk about the cost of the herbiciding? I was surprised at what appeared to be a pretty big difference between the contracting it out at $15,000 to $20,000 a year.
Well, so you have to pay prevailing, you have to pay prevailing wage for that. So if we were to contract that out, we would probably do the whole site. If we do it in-house, then we're just paying for the herbicide and we can do it as needed. So it depends, like, let's say we have a huge problem with cattails. That's going to cost us a lot more to eradicate than having certain areas where it's just, spot treatment. But we typically, what happens is we stay on top of it. Then we also have volunteers that we use. So we have a volunteer pool that's trained in herbicide application. They'll be able to assist us. And that's what's able to keep our costs down in terms of doing it in-house versus contracting it out. Our Canterbury site that I talked about earlier, that's an area where we'll contract it out and it's expensive, but you're paying for kind of more bang for your buck, and you're able to knock it out a lot faster than if we were to do it in-house. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll do a combination with a contractor of a prescribed burn and an herbicide application, and that can also keep the cost down. So let's say 1 year they'll herbicide, the next year they'll follow up with a prescribed burn, and we're able to partner it with that as well. It just depends on our goal and what we want to achieve, and how quickly we need to achieve it.
I know that hasn't been finished for all that long, but have you any sort of budgeting targets for how much you think the 80-acre site is going to cost you
in perpetuity
a year, and when you convert your in-house labor to?
And how much it'll cost us in perpetuity?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we haven't done that. And part of so one of the things that we're doing at the township is we're trying to slowly get the town fund, our levied fund, to slowly start to absorb the cost of the open space district. So when I took office in 2009, they had everything paid for out of the open space fund, and we were going through those funds rather quickly. Since then, what's happened is we have had the town fund now pays for the employees, they pay for their benefits, they pay for any professional services. We pay for some of the hard costs out of the town fund. Any purchases in terms of equipment are now paid for out of the town fund, but I don't know. I could look into it, but I don't have a number offhand or off the top of my head of what the long-term costs of that open space of that Atkinson site will cost us. I would just say, we're anticipating every 2 to 3 years that we'll have to conduct a prescribed burn out there, which may cost us approximately $20,000. If we can do it in-house, we will. What happens sometimes is we have site management plans, and we have different areas of the site are separated out. So then we'll say, okay, we'll burn section A this year, next year we'll do section B, and that way we can manage it and do it in-house. But given the homes that are there, it's more likely that, you know, we would contract that work out. And the fact that it's right adjacent to Atkinson Road. It's kind of like the other site that we have that's adjacent to Butterfield Road and a school. We just have to be mindful of those other areas.
Was there essentially just one little creek running through the site? Is that?
It's not really, I mean, there's water that runs through there. It's pretty, oh, now it's very wet. But I wouldn't say like it's a super active flowing creek. It's not like our other parcels where, like our KC North and KC South. But there is water that flows through there.
Okay, thanks.
I want to make sure that I have a better idea of the relationship that you had with Land and Water Resources. How did that work?
That contract was developed before, entered into before I took office. It's considered a professional service. The township had a previous working relationship with Land and Water Resources with the other two banks. And so the previous supervisor had, engaged Land and Water Resources and asked them the potential for that site. And that's how that process started. And then the sale of those credits in terms of what the township would receive in terms of what percentage of the sale of those credits, that was all negotiated after Land and Water was selected. So I know that we received $6,000 per credit acre. And then once it hit a certain threshold, that's when, we received close to $950,000 for that site. I don't know how much the banker made.
So, okay, so it doesn't sound like a situation where there was a straight expense and then you all received essentially the proceeds at each step point in the release with the core, the 20 or 30% at year 2 kind of thing, and then so
Correct.
you all received a smaller amount, and in exchange, Land and Water did all the heavy lifting.
Correct.
Okay.
And actually, Land and Water in that situation was, we were copied on correspondence with the Army Corps of Engineers and all that kind of stuff. But basically, you turn your property over to that banker, because if someone were to go down that route, we turn that property over to the banker, and that banker assumed all the risk in dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers, the construction of that bank, the release of the credits, and making sure that it met that certain threshold, and the reporting of the credits too, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I mean, we weren't guaranteed a regular flow of revenue, but we weren't generating any revenue on that site anyway. We weren't doing anything on that site. So for us, it was kind of a win-win situation. We got the site restored. We weren't really I don't want to say we weren't involved, because of course we had to make sure we were corresponding with the neighbors and those types of things. But in terms of the actual work that was done on ground and the the correspondence with the IRT, the township's role was minimal. And there was risk involved in that too. I don't want to make it seem like it's it's this stress-free experience. You're talking about public land that you've turned over to a third party, and you're ultimately responsible for it. But like I said, for us, because our long-term goal is restoration and stormwater management, it was a nice complement and a nice tool for us to use to achieve those goals.
So you received progressive payments as the
credits were sold.
as the credits were sold, and at different time points and release points with the core. You didn't receive money up front with you. It wasn't like you turned everything over to Land and Water and then they just kind of gave it back to you. So
Right. Well, we didn't. So what will happen is, before those initial credits are sold, the Army Corps will give you permission to sell those credits. That wasn't money that was coming to us because we hadn't assumed, we had no financial risk. The banker needed those funds theoretically to create the bank. That's one of the reasons why you get those funds, is that you have seed money then to create the bank. Now, the assumption is you have that money anyway, and that's why you're doing it. But theoretically, you are compensated for taking that risk of creating that bank. And so we didn't get any money initially until after those after that bank was established and then those credits were sold.
Gotcha.
And that all depends. Now that could have just been the contract that we entered into.
Right.
That's not to say that everyone would enter the same contract that the township did.
Exactly. And that's kind of one of the take-home notes that I've made here is, I'm going to guess every contract may be a little bit different. Every circumstance is a little different. Your situation may be different, clearly was different than ours, perhaps. But
for us, it really, if you, we would never generate the type of revenue that we have for this public land. And we still have the obligation to maintain it. So for us, it's been appealing. Now it's not, doesn't necessarily mean it's a good fit for everyone. Our two other banks, I have to give Betty Ann Moore, the previous supervisor, a lot of credit. She, in that contract, she was the one that said, hey, once it hits a certain threshold and credits that are sold, we get a higher cut, piece of the pie. I would have, kudos to her for thinking of that. That was a wonderful negotiation that she entered into. And so I would say, those are all things that an entity would need to consider in terms of what are the financial needs, what's the risk that you're willing to take, how much do you want back to the taxpayers initially? Those are all things that I would think that a public body could negotiate.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
George, I have one more if no one does. George Russell again. Kathleen, is the Corps still providing any type of oversight? It's our understanding that about 5 years after a bank is completed, that the Corps essentially becomes completely disengaged.
Right. That's
sort of an honor system to maintain the wetlands. Is that your experience? Where are you in that process?
That's correct. Now the bank is our responsibility. I will say though, the Corps does pay attention to it, and the township, we had a situation where on our Canterbury site, when we were pursuing our Atkinson site, there were questions that were asked about the amount of the amount of cattails that were out there, and the township, the Corps has a vested interest because they want that property to function as a wetland and be well stewarded. But we have no obligation once the bank is turned over to us, to the Army Corps of Engineers.
Thanks.
Others? I have a series, but I want to make sure everybody has a chance.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, big surprise. So let me start with one that I just want to make sure I understand the difference in philosophy between the creation of the Atkinson Road parcel and the Casey Road parcel. So the Atkinson Road parcel was essentially a subcontract. So essentially the township entered into an agreement with Land and Water Resources, Inc., allowing them to fully develop as a wetland the property, and I'm sure there was, you know, negotiation as to what the ultimate product would look like. But in essence, Land and Water Resources had the financial risk, they fronted the money, and in exchange, the township received, through a variety of payment mechanisms, a portion of the proceeds from the sale of credits.
Correct.
Okay, then we move to Casey Road,
Mhm.
and it seems like the philosophy has changed. It seems, if I understand correctly, the township is now doing the work, with the exception of the bank, managing, building and managing the bank. The township is doing the work that Land and Water Resources did for Atkinson Road. Do I have that right?
I would say I probably wouldn't characterize it as that our philosophy has changed. Our in-house ability to manage that project has changed. And so if you, a lot of times you ask for professional services in areas that you are in need of support. Because of our experience with the 3 other banks and the large scale restoration that we've done, we just have felt that we can assume more of the responsibility in the creation of that bank and going through that process, with our goal being that it'll be more beneficial to the taxpayers.
Okay, and congratulations on getting and keeping the in-house resources. I know these people can be a scarce commodity. So then that leads to my next question, I guess. These are expensive projects. I mean, there's a lot of earth to be moved. There's a lot of design work. There's legal work. There's a lot of upfront cost before, and then the time frame that the Corps of Engineers puts in their regulation. So there's a lot of upfront cost and length of time before credits can be sold and before, you know, there can be a profit. Am I correct in assuming that the township is fronting those dollars?
I mean, and this site is, the site that we're discussing right now is considerably different. It's all in ag. So we're not talking about the cost of removing, you know, 80 acres of buckthorn. We're not talking about the cost of removing 80 acres of invasive species, huge herbicide application. You know, it's basically in corn and soybean it's been in corn and soybean for years. And so those initial costs in terms of clearing that land have already been addressed. We can physically see the challenges that are out there. We see the erosion. We see where the water's flowing. We've done drain tile mapping. I mean, we've done our legwork, so we know how that land is functioning. When you have 80 acres that are covered with buckthorn and you can't see 5 feet in front of you, you have no idea what you're going to uncover. And that was the risk that Land and Water took. And, and this site, it's just different. And we've watched the water flow over the road. So there's the risk of the unknown is not as significant as it was on Atkinson.
Okay, but there still obviously had to have been
we've spent money on professional services already. You know, we've spent engineering costs. We've spent, attorney fees. That we've already taken. We've already made the financial investment into that site. The difference is we're going to make that financial investment whether we go down a wetland mitigation bank or not. So that land is going to be restored. Either it's going to be restored through this opportunity, or we'll look for grants to restore it, because our goal is to address the stormwater issue and keep more of that soil on those fields and improve the habitat out there. And so it's not really, for us, it's not an issue of if we're going to restore it. The question is when and how are we going to do it?
Yeah, it just clicked for me. You were going to essentially be doing this anyway. So,
correct.
Right. So you could have a budget process to make that happen. And then to the degree that you can reconform the land in a manner compatible with the sale of wetland credits, then that's just a bonus.
That's a bonus for us. Okay,
I get it. You talked about the market for credits. How much, if you can share with us, do you recall how much fluctuation there was in the price of each individual credit?
No, because so are you talking about with land and water resources?
Or
Um,
in any of the experiences? Because we've
So
seen,
the other, yeah, so for when those are turned over, you can check, I think that on the Army Corps' website, there might be that level of detail. We didn't, I guess we probably could have audited it and see if we were being shortchanged by land and water resources, that we were getting the percentage that we were owed. But our contract was for $6,000 per credit, regardless of what he sold them for.
Yeah,
I don't know what it was for the other banks that were restored. My understanding is that the township had the land was restored for our Canterbury site. We were given money, seed money for restoration, and a trail was done, but there was no other financial compensation that the township received. So it didn't really matter what land and water was selling those credits for. We weren't getting that money.
okay. Yeah, and the reason I ask is that at some point in our analysis, we're going to have to determine any variability in the market rate of credits, and whether or not how elastic the market is, for those credits, so that we can determine a return on any investment we need to make. So your experience is very helpful. I have another kind of off the wall question. I asked this to our speaker 2 weeks ago, and I think I might ask it to every speaker until I get the answer I like. No, that's not true. So one of the things that, one of the challenges in looking at building out a wetland area and looking to sell credits as part of that development is the necessity to follow the Corps of Engineers rules, which essentially mean you've got to put your money in up front. You've got to demonstrate that this works. And then over a period of time, that could be up to 10 years from beginning to end, you'll get your money back.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a significant deterrent for someone, I would think, who is trying to either self-fund this or to look at funding for this. So my question is, if you know of this or have thought about this, have you ever heard of the wetland credits that have been approved but not released for funding, right? So the Corps of Engineer has approved the structure. There's a number of credits that you're working towards, but you haven't met the performance standards yet that are in the core arrangement. Do you know if it's conceivable to use the future value of the sale of credits as collateral to offset the development of the property itself?
I don't know that. What I have been told by a banker is that it is possible to lock a potential buyer in early, and that once those credits are sold, then, or once that site meets the threshold, you have those locked up with that potential buyer. Now, I guess the risk, just thinking out loud, would be, well, if you lock them in at that price, if the price goes up, you miss that growth,
Sure. Oh, sure.
But that's life, right? That's that's the financial risk we'll take if we're going through that. So for me, when that information was shared with me, I did find that comforting in the fact that if it becomes a very competitive market where there's the market is flooded with wetland mitigation credits, there's a possibility that you could enter into a contract and someone commits to those credits before they actually need them. I have been told that's an option. We haven't done that yet. So I'm hoping that information that was relayed to me is accurate.
Well, and that's very helpful. I haven't thought of that, but just to put it in my own terms, make sure I understand. If this project would move forward and the Park District would be able to identify a developer who is going to be starting a construction that is going to need mitigation because they're destroying wetlands, it is conceivable that there could be a pre-credit certification arrangement with that buyer. Potentially that would include some cash up front, potentially, but that's a whole nother area of pre-funding, I guess I would call it. That was very helpful. That was excellent.
So are you saying, Steve, you might not ask that question again to somebody else?
No, I'll just keep asking. Right now, you get the gold star for the best answer. You got
I'm
the
just
business.
kidding.
Yeah, me too. What's it like to work with the Corps?
I
You've
mean,
got, by the way, before I forget, I did want to say this. I really like cattails. So every time you talk about eliminating cattails, I just sort of shiver,
I know,
Anyway.
I like cattails too, but
Yeah.
other people don't seem to be as fond of them. Let's just put it that way.
No. So you hear about the Corps of Engineers and you
Yeah.
hear about them as the big scary engineers, that come in with and make you do things. How are they to work with?
I think a lot of people's frustration with the Corps is the lack of understanding that it's a bureaucracy. And it's just like any type of relationship. I don't find them particularly frustrating. I understand that they have their guidelines that they have to go through. They have their process. We're one of many projects that they're managing. Would I like it to move faster? Sure. Have I ever felt that we were treated unfairly by the Corps, or that they did not, that they weren't addressing our project quickly enough? Yeah. But I think that's just one of the challenges with dealing with a bureaucracy of that size. It's easier for us, if we're working with a county or we're working with another municipality, you tend to know people. And so you could maybe make things happen a bit faster, or you can meet with them in a more timely manner. The Corps, not, they're just big. And so I don't go into it blindly. I realize that it's going to require patience on our part. And, but they're always extremely professional. They're courteous. I've never walked away, feeling dismissed. I just, our project may not be on their radar as quickly as I would like it. If you're willing to accept that, your frustration level will go down considerably.
Okay. I guess my last general question, in both the Atkinson Road and now especially in the Casey Road, are there any aha moments or unexpected expenses or delays that you can share with us as we think through this process?
I think, for me personally, an aha moment has been starting writing up the RFQ to have for the engaging some entity to assist us with the selling, the reporting of the credits, because typically what happens is, you hire, we've hired a banker to do it all for us. So now I'm going to have to figure out how we're going to word this, and is it going to be appealing for someone just to do this aspect of the project for us? That's probably a challenge. That is a challenge that we're going to face, and where, because we don't have that level of experience, that could be part of the learning curve. I think an aha moment for me was when I decided we were going to take more financial risk, was when we received that check for, $950,000. And I realized that there was no way any farm license agreement was going to generate this amount of revenue for the taxpayers to take care of this land in perpetuity. And so that was an aha moment. I think that, communicating with our neighbors and explaining why things take so long is an aha moment. We have a farm license agreement. There's been a farmer that has farmed that land for 25 years. They view that land as their own personal land, even though they're our tenant. That was an aha moment. This decision was going to affect someone's business, someone's livelihood. That was not a decision I took lightly. So you have to weigh all of those issues. But then we have stormwater issues that are affecting neighbors downstream. That's a huge aha moment. It's like, do we decide not to restore this land because there's a farmer that has been farming it for 25 years when there is a neighborhood downstream that's flooding, and this could, really help minimize the flooding that's occurring on site, in addition to generating revenue? I think the other aha moment is there will never be a perfect solution. You know, no matter what decision the township makes, there is going to be some level of unintended consequences, or some people are not going to be happy with it. And that's just the risk you assume in serving the public. You know, my hope is that we make decisions that on a whole are not about me personally, but about, you know, improving the quality of life for the people that we serve and the land that we own. Because I won't be in office forever, you know, but that land is going to be here and there's always going to be taxpayers. And so, you know, am I leaving it in a better way than I found it? And, you know, my hope is through these wetland mitigation banks, we've achieved that goal. Not just the financial aspect of it, but that the land health is better and the stormwater management has improved dramatically. That in turn has improved the quality of life of the people that live in our community.
Great. And it's very obvious you're passionate about serving your constituencies, and you've got a really, I think, a really nice story to tell and a really good outcome for all your hard work. I would, Mark, do we have addresses for the 3 sites that we've talked about? Because I know I want to go look at them now. And maybe not tomorrow, but sometime if I can tromp around and
well, if you're interested, our staff would be and I would be happy to accompany you. It would, you know, there's no problem, you know, either one-on-one or if you want to do a field trip, just let me know. And we definitely could work that out.
Okay. So Mark,
if you could send, I was going to say, if you could send John the addresses or the geo coordinates for the sites, if that's a little easier for us to work with. And I think that as we talk about the other couple of projects here, we're obviously getting a whole lot more data in this setting than I'm going to be able to provide for the other 2. But both of the other 2 folks have extended an invitation as well for us to come out for field trips. And we've talked about going out and tromping around in our own wetland area right now as a field trip a lot closer to home. So yeah, for sure. If you could share that with John, then we'll get in touch with you and try to make some arrangements to spend the afternoon with you guys. Or Nikki can take us to Atkinson.
Right. She can walk you through that trail.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Kathleen?
Kathleen, I'm glad we found you, Kathleen. And yes. Kathleen and I had a great conversation initially, and I think we got through about 5 minutes of it, and we must have talked for half an hour anyway. And she said, and I'm more than happy to come out and talk to you guys. So I thought, this is somebody we need to work with. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you so much for inviting me. Best of luck on this process. And, you know, I just applaud you for taking it on. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And if you'd like to listen to the other case studies, please feel free.
Okay. Okay. So how do I'm just going to jump off myself. Is that okay?
You can just stay on the Zoom. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff, is there something special that you need?
No, you can just leave the meeting.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
So our audience members, I know there's at least one hand raised, but what I would like to do is get through all 3 case studies, and then we'll take whatever questions are in the audience, because some of your questions may get answered. So Mark, I'll turn it back to you for the other 2 case studies.
Jeff, can you tee up the next slide, please? The one for the Preserve of Highland Park.
Just a quick note before we do that, Steve, there are over 30 species of cattails. Some are invasive and some are not invasive.
Okay, good.
And so there are good ones and bad ones. And
so I'll come to you.
It's an important distinction.
Okay, I'll come to you to make sure the ones I like are the good ones. I just have such fun memories of running around in the woods and in the woodland areas in Wisconsin and playing with all the cattails. Probably getting too wet, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, Mark.
Okay,
Mark, I
thank you.
don't have that other presentation.
Okay.
It's in the material that was distributed, if that helps, Jeff.
Jeff, it's in the packet. If you just want to pull the packet up and then just scroll through it.
Yeah, that would be great.
We start on page 35.
So Mark, while he's doing that, why don't you just give us some background of what you did?
Yeah, so the first one that I'll talk about is the Park District of Highland Parks Preserve. The slide that Jeff will bring up here after the initial photo is just a quick map of the site in general. If you're familiar with the area, this is between Park Avenue on the south and Half Day Road on the north. It pretty closely, it's just east of US 41. It's the site of the former Highland Park Country Club golf course. And so the first photo that we'll look at is just an outline in orange for that. The first two slides are a lot easier for you to look at home, simply because of the level of detail. The second slide is a map of what I guess I would call features and amenities for the site. That is itself a lot more detailed, and again, it would be a whole lot easier for you to look through and read and understand those yourself. So I won't, it probably wouldn't be appropriate for me to call a lot of these to your attention. If we can just bump up a couple of pages there. Yep, to 36 there, Jeff, would be great. So you can see the boundaries of the site. It's kind of the old parallelogram with an extra little leg or arm at the very top. The Skokie River is the blue line coming down northwest to southeast pretty much along the western perimeter of the site. This you still see golf course features on there. You can see the lake that's there, the large lake, and that's still present. So that's the site itself. If we go to the next page, again, these are the amenities. It's virtually impossible for me to share this with you tonight. You can blow it up and blow it up. As we'll talk, they used a lot of golf cart trails, paths to create trails through there. They have added some fun activities for families and kids, and mostly it's related to trails with some natural features added into it. The next slide gives you kind of a quick overview of their timeline. This is, as we'll talk in a minute, this is entirely managed internally, pretty much internally to the city and park district. The Corps of Engineers was not involved at all. So the regulatory impact of this, as I understand it, is significantly less than the kind of thing that we would be talking about for our site, as well as what Kathleen was talking about as well. So as you can see, construction actually began in 2020. Prep work
Does anyone else?
Mark,
Mark, you still,
Pardon?
you froze for a bit.
Okay.
So you were just saying construction began in?
Oh, yeah, construction began in October of 20. Planning for this, as we'll see on the following page when we get there, started about 2 years before. This is a screen grab from their website, and all of this information you can find on the website for the Park District of Highland Park. They did not move very much dirt at all. The only dirt really that they moved was around grading of the large lake feature that we saw before. They plan on opening in a couple of months officially. They've been doing some plannings and some other things. Different pieces of the park, of the preserve, are open today, but they open and close depending on the work that they're doing. Then let's go to the following page, and this kind of summarizes what happened here. They had some community attitude and interest surveys in 2009 through 2013 that identified a need to have walking and biking trails in the city of Highland Park, or community of Highland Park, I should say. Highland Park, the city had acquired the country club site. The Park District purchased the site from the city. They then formed a citizens advisory committee to help them figure out a master plan. And following that process, in mid-2019, and it recounts open houses, committee meetings, and so forth, they agreed that they would develop a natural environment with play opportunities and places to relax and explore in the out of doors. So they had about 100 acres in the golf course itself. They did not, the clubhouse, as it were, the main building for the golf course, was not part of this rec process. But it's now protected open space. It's woodlands, wetlands. They've got the riverfront areas. They retained sand traps. They've added some other features in there as well. The important thing, and we talked about this at a previous meeting, is this was not intended to mitigate flooding. Having said that, there are a number of parallels to process that might be interesting for us to understand along the way with further conversation with the Park District. They did have a need to do some seeding, so they did about 50 acres of seeding with native plants. And again, the formal opening is planned for May of this year. Construction bid of $1.2 million, and that pretty well considered all the costs. Their funding included a couple of state grants, one from the DNR and one from Illinois EPA. And again, as I mentioned, since there wasn't any mitigation, there was no wetland banking for this particular project. The Park District has a project manager for wetlands and for natural spaces, and she took charge of the project. She did utilize outside design and construction resources, so third parties were involved in those. So again, this is a rather top level. Had a very good conversation with the project manager for this. I think we would find her willing to talk with us in additional detail, depending on what specific interests that our task force has. I did talk to her about the possibilities of a field trip down there to kind of take a walk through there, and that's something that she thinks that they'd be able to arrange for us. So at a top level, just, and again, in summary, they like us have engaged a citizens panel to go through here to do some assessments and to talk about alternatives and priorities and things like that. And once that once those details were offered up to the Park District, then they took it from there and proceeded with the implementation. So,
Mark, am I correct in understanding though, that this is not a wetlands credit? This is not a wetlands credit bank situation?
That's
So they
correct.
maintain control of the land. This is the purpose.
Correct.
Change
Yep.
the purpose.
Yep.
Okay.
and they've had largely with there's been a minimum, I would say, as I think about this, there's been a minimum of shall we say friction with neighbors up at the northeast corner. The development was across the way from some condos, and I think during construction there was a little bit of friction that sounded like that seems to have been resolved. And I just happened to think about that, Julie. It has nothing to do with wetland banking, but yeah, this is the upfront part of the process is similar, potentially how the kinds of features that they have for passive and active recreation may end up being similar, depending on how this proceeds. So there's some similarities, but a lot of significant differences. It is in our backyard, and I guess that's an advantage. And more perspectives are perhaps helpful. So.
Do you, I mean, the $64,000 question, which I'm not sure if you had that opportunity to ask, but why was it a conscious decision to not do mitigation banking, to go this route? And do you have any sense?
It was my impression that they did not have an interest in doing that. They were content to simply convert the space for a modest amount of money into active and passive recreation. I think Al had indicated at a previous meeting that it was his understanding that there were some covenants that prevented them from doing that. I have not gone back to press that matter with my contact in Highland Park at this point. Al, if you've got some insight there, this would be a good opportunity to share, I think.
I had heard that from one of the people that worked on the project.
Okay.
But I don't have any definitive source.
Okay. All right.
One of the people that worked on the project said that they were not allowed to remove sand traps. They were not allowed to do a lot of things. And basically all they were allowed to do was seed.
Okay.
Okay. So just as a advance reminder, can't do that. There's a seminar this Thursday that is on our agenda to talk about later on wetland stormwater management, and the Highland Park folks are on the agenda. So if anybody is interested in hearing from them on the development of the preserves, just sign up for that Thursday seminar. Okay, what's the next one?
So the next one is in Dupage County, and if you want to, there we go. So the gist of it here is that there is a golf course, an Oak Meadow golf course that's in Dupage County and in Addison, and the Salt Creek winds its way through the golf course. And here there's a similarity to us in that the creek regularly floods, and it floods and negatively impacts the golf course. Likewise, at the same time, it floods out some residential areas. And so this is what it looks like now. I don't have any photos of what it looked like beforehand. If you pop, there are 2 more pages of photos that give you an idea of what the space was, or is rather, and one more there. So the next page has kind of the summary. I've tried to make these summaries relatively similar to make it easier to understand for us. Again, Salt Creek goes about 1.25 miles through the forest preserve in Addison. They had the flooding issues for homes and the golf course. They wanted to find an approach to address this that was natural. And so there is an organization, kind of a confederation in the Dupage County called the Dupage River Salt Creek Work Group. And they were kind of the sounding board that moved this whole process and project forward. And so in 2015, that work group, along with the Forest Preserve District in Dupage County, which interestingly are separate groups, they were split 20 or 30 years ago. They were tasked to figure out how to use the golf course as a means of addressing stormwater and stormwater mitigation, or turning it in from a liability to an asset. The golf course reopened in 2017, and it's a multifaceted project. It created 35 new acres of wetlands. It created 40 acres of prairie. This is, to me, is staggering. This is not my thing, but the notion that they can accept 20 million additional gallons of storm water, which is enough to deal with at least the old 100-year storm event, is pretty incredible. My understanding is that they enabled the Salt Creek to kind of meander and wind its way through the golf course, and that helped them considerably in order to develop the wetlands. 85% of the property is now devoted to savanna, prairie, and river ecosystems, and the golf cart paths double as a trail system. And I think one of the golf course magazines described it as a preserve that now happens to include golf. The project cost about $17 million. Funding sources included a wetland mitigation bank. They got a couple $1 million from the work group and $2.5 million from Dupage County for environmental improvements. It's interesting, the Dupage Forest Preserve District has a dedicated water management staff. And a number of years ago, they entered into an agreement with the Corps of Engineers to handle regulatory issues in-house. So a lot of the regulatory oversight is managed in-house within the Forest Preserve District. They also manage their own finance and do their own wetland banking, the administrative aspects of that in-house. They exercise significant oversight to the design and construction phases, even though they subcontract those phases, the design and construction, to third parties. The fellow there who's in charge of this made it very clear that they had a very strong oversight of that process. So these folks were super helpful. The fellow who is responsible for this, likewise, they would be pleased to have us, whatever us is, come down and visit, and to see their project, talk to them in any detail. I would think that they have they've seen these projects from a couple of different perspectives. At one time they were doing these projects on a completely third party, and now they've absorbed it and brought it in-house. So they have quite a bit of expertise that they might be able to share with us. and very professional fellow. So that ends my report. If there are any, obviously, if there are any questions, I can ask.
I just have a quick question. That 288 acre section, is that the acreage of the whole site, including the golf course?
Correct.
288 acres.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have a lot of land to work with.
That's a big,
which is a real plus.
Yeah, because a lot of golf courses are probably on 150 acres or less. So I don't know the acreage of our course, but we don't have 288. I know that.
No,
No,
and I think that's a significant determinant, Rob. They had a lot of space to work with, and you know, I think we've heard people talk about the poor quality of a lot of golf course turf and things like that with respect to water absorption, and they clearly have a surplus of space. Having said that, I think it's the interesting thing to me is how they literally transformed. They had a site that didn't really purposely help with any kind of flood mitigation, and they kind of turned it on its head and turned it into a site that was very purposeful in that regard. And
no, it's an impressive project. Really impressive.
It is very impressive.
Rob,
Go ahead.
Bob, just for your information, the Park District site is about 1/2 that, 145 acres all in. And that 20 million gallons of storage is, if anybody cares, it's 61 acre feet is what they created. So, because I read that number and had to do the number crunching myself to understand, you know, the total volume land area they were working with and what they managed to create.
No, so, George, can you say that again? 61 acre feet.
61 acre feet. 61 acre feet is that 20 million gallons. That's what that equates to.
So,
wow.
So George, the Stormwater Management Commission is asking the Lake Bluff Park District to absorb 15 million gallons in its storage facility. That's the straight, right?
If that's what it would be, yeah.
This is a staggering number to me. I don't know about you guys, but
it sounds easier, and that's why they use acre feet, because the numbers are so large.
For sure.
Okay.
That's a lot of milk bottles.
I have a couple of quick questions. Anybody else have questions for Mark on Dupage County? I have a couple. Do you know, and this is something I think we need to start asking so this is an example of coexistence of a development that where an 18-hole golf course coexists very nicely with wetlands and open space, and that used wetland banking as a partial funding source. Do you, Mark, know how many wetland credits they generated? Is it safe to say, since it created 35 new acres of wetlands, that would be a rough?
You know, that George, Steve, that's a really good question, and a question that I didn't ask, but I can certainly ask that question and get that information. So
okay. So it's safe to say that the sale of wetland credits offset a relatively small portion of the total construction cost.
Yeah, you know, exactly. But, you know, the other piece of this, Steve, is, and you raise an interesting question. I created 35 new wetland acres, but are they able to take any credit for turning any other acreage on the golf course into, I'll put wetland in air quotes, into mitigated area that they may be able to get at least even lower quality credits for?
Yeah.
Because someplace I've read, someplace in the information we had, there's different qualities of the space, and I kind of wonder, trying to come up with that $17 million, there's still that it cost. There's still, you know, $13-14 million short, and if they used all of that for wetland credit, that's clearly more than the 35 acres.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
I think we're kind of, you know, we're kind of learning more as we go along, which provides us with maybe some additional follow-up questions for them to understand how all this works.
Yeah, and if you talk, when you talk to them again, could you also ask, are there wetlands contiguous? Because there is a requirement of the Corps of Engineers. There's a minimum size that would be considered for wetland credits. So, you know, it looks like they intersperse the credits in the design of the course. So that would just be an interesting question. And then the last thing I have is, and something that we need to begin to focus on, is how long was the golf course closed? How long did it take to actually build this? Because if a golf course and stormwater storage can coexist in Lake Bluff, the golf course would have to be closed, and it'd be nice to know how many golfing seasons.
You know, Steve, in the back of my mind, that information, you know, I've got the wrong, I'm looking at the wrong computer, but I want to say that number was like 2 years. That's sort
of what your report implies.
Yeah, I want to say that it took them about 2 years to do the construction phase on this. And as I mentioned, they're very, very proud of the fact down there that they're able to manage this kind of thing more quickly, since they're doing it significantly on their own, without a lot of, the Corps is still involved, but my sense is that the Corps may be involved at the beginning and at the end, but maybe not so much in the middle. But they do all their own RFQs, they do all their own speccing, they do all their own work in the middle, and it sounds like it'd be a very impressive thing to take a look at.
Yeah, Mark, I looked them up. They're a monster. Their budget last year was $97 million.
Okay. Okay. And as I said, they're a separate taxing and political entity from their county board. So it's a big deal down there.
Well, Mark, thank you for 3 really interesting, very different case studies. Have to think about what we've learned from all of these. And, you know, if you find some more, we'd love to hear some more of these. Any questions for Mark on these before? I do know there was a hand raised, and I said we would pause here if there were questions on the case studies.
Here's one.
Okay.
George Helmer.
Yeah, hi. My name is George Helmer, and thanks for opening it up the line. Let us participate and listen in. So yeah, I had to provide us a couple observations about the 3 case studies, which are great. And I think my first one, I was hoping to ask, I think, Kathleen, the question. So in the first project for the Libertyville one, it seems like it was kind of, it seemed like the perfect situation for them to take advantage of the creating the banks and selling the credits, right? I think, you know, just to clarify, I think the land, she said, pre-project was, it was unimproved, it was full of buckthorn and invasive species, and was probably just an eyesore and not being used for anything. So, so they took advantage of opportunity to improve it from what it was, which was great. And I think The other thing I noticed that it took 12 years for them, I think, from the initiation of the project, where they started 2008, and wasn't until 2020 until they kind of finished selling the credit. So I think that time period was really pretty extended. And then I think the last thing what I was curious about, and you all probably know this, was the selling of these wetland credits. It's kind of a one-shot deal, right? In the sense it doesn't generate revenue on an ongoing basis. You sell them and then they're gone at that point, then they're stopped, and then it's no longer a revenue generating item, right? And I think that's the case.
Yeah, and we'll certainly summarize this when we do our report and as we talk with the community about the report. But you're right, the sale of a wetland credit is a one-time event. And once that credit is sold, then there can be no change to that land use, but there also is no additional revenue stream for maintenance or upkeep.
Got it. Perfect. And then perfect. Yeah. And then the second case study, I wasn't sure if it really fit in with the remit of this task force, which I thought was to evaluate the proposal from the SMC and talk about the selling of credits in wetlands, because I think that was just a pure change in use of an existing facility, the conversion from a golf course to a park, which is a little different. So I didn't know that was part of the remit of this task force, but I know that you guys want to look at other options as well. And the last one was interesting. I know there's a big price tag on that conversion in Dupage County. I don't know the details, but I'd be curious if somebody talked to the Lake County and the folks about, Thunderhawk up in Beach Park. Is a Lake County owned golf course, which also has some Audubon Society kind of certification, where they've kind of blended a golf course and nature preserve. I don't know if anybody who's ever been up there. It's a beautiful space. It's a very large piece of property. But if you're looking for other, maybe similar opportunities to find the balance between leveraging an existing golf course asset and also offer improving some in aesthetics and some wetland creation, that might be something to investigate.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, Steve. Yeah, that's an Audubon designation that course has, and Stone Old Orchard out in Volo has another nature component to it with the wilderness that they've created there. But these are big acreage plots of land, similar to what we see out here in DuPage. So they have a lot of space to work with, both those golf courses, to be able to integrate those ideas together. So, but that's an observation of a golfer who goes to those courses.
And sounds like you enjoy it.
Both of them, they're not walking courses. You got to ride a cart. It's just too darn far to walk.
All right, George, thank you for your comments. And we'll take a look at Beach Park and Volo. Are there any other?
Yes, JJ Markey.
Hi, yes. First off, thank you guys everyone for your participation. I know it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort to work on different task force and activities, so it is appreciated. And I guess I want to make sure the task force is really specifically focused in just this parcel, correct? It's not a full land use activity across all Lake Bluff. It really is just this parcel. I'm just trying to balance out to try and understand, Lake Bluff, I believe, has about 25% green space already in the town. So I'm just trying to say that it's a full land use, or is this really just for this parcel of land right now?
It's just for this. It's for the golf course, the Portler Park. And if you look at way back to our first meeting, you can actually read the instructions that from the Park District Board. There are two parts to it. One is to evaluate a proposal from the Stormwater Management Commission, a request for stormwater storage on the golf course facility. And then the second is to look at the opportunity for land use changes that may or may not result from stormwater storage on the golf course. and potentially look at a revenue stream from the sale of wetland credits. But it is those two features and only for the golf course portion of Love Park.
Okay, and then does it also include the revenue from the last couple of years of the existing? Is it a comparison? Is it are we just doing? Is it just missed? Is it an opportunity cost analysis, or are we looking at a full, comparison of revenue generation from existing streams like the golf course?
Yeah, we will
30 grand.
In 2 weeks at our next meeting, we will have our initial look at revenue and cost from the golf course. We're trying to put a shortened version of golf course financials, both operating and capital. So that will be included as part of the analysis. We will not look at anything other than the financials of the golf course. And that's code for we're not going to look at what any revenue generated might buy and what it could be used for in other areas under the responsibility of the Park District. The Park District Board will look at that, but we're looking specifically at this and costs and expense. Okay.
Understood the message. Yep. I'll look forward to the meeting in 2 weeks then.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. Any others?
No.
Okay, great. Let's move on to our next agenda item, which is discussion of the Stormwater Management Commission. So as we discussed at our last meeting, John and George and I had a conversation with the Stormwater Management folks. We generated a memo that had 13 questions based on their presentation from 2 weeks ago. The SMC folks were very gracious in their discussion and also answered each of the questions in writing, and that's what's in our packet. I propose to go over these at a high level. I'll pause at the end of each one, and if there are questions from the task force members. And the reason I want to do this is because, and we will discuss this when we're done with this document, but I believe we're at a point where we can draft a tentative set of findings for our first mission to understanding the SMC proposal. I believe that we have investigated this and understand what SMC is looking for, the pluses and minuses and the parameters of that. And I would suggest, and we'll talk about this again in 10 minutes, but I would suggest that at the next meeting of this task force, we have a draft of our tentative report that would go to the board. Wouldn't go to the board till everything else is done, but we sort of get the first part of our remit finished, questions answered, and move along. So let's focus then on the letter and the Stormwater Management Commission answers. The first, is that me who's beeping or is somebody else beeping here? So the first is a matter of terminology. If you remember last meeting, I was using the term retention. And the task force, after discussion, agreed that was inappropriate, and we started using retention. The Stormwater Management Commission team would prefer that we use the term stormwater storage, because both detention and retention are defined terms in the Corps of Engineer nomenclature, and they mean using them may have unintended consequences 6 months or 2 years from now. So I'm suggesting that, and it's hard because I'm so used to detention, I'm trying to use stormwater storage whenever we use detention. Okay, so
well, Steve, real quick, if I may ask, because I was looking at that part there, and because I think what they're talking about is a detention area, because I would say those ponds that are out on the golf course right now, those are more retention in nature. They're not really accommodating wetlands. So that's the difference that I understood the two terms to be, but I'm okay with the language you're talking about.
Storage is much more generic.
Yeah.
And if one of the decisions then, as I understand it, is does the park district wish to move from stormwater storage to wetland? So stormwater storage is not by definition a wetland, but that area could be converted so that it would be considered wetland eligible for wetland credits.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So question number one, essentially reiterated the fact that there are a number of options that the Stormwater Management Commission had presented in their report. And the preferred option, and in fact, the only option that had no deleterious effect downstream, meaning no increase in velocity or volume of stormwater flowing south of the Park District property, was the one that created the stormwater storage on the Park District property. And we asked the stormwater management folks to confirm that, and they said, yeah, this is the only option that actually serves all the purposes. There are other options, meaning putting storage on the Navy base, but this is the preferred option because it checks all their boxes and has no negative effect downstream. Another threshold question is, well, does the park district have to do something? Can the park district just say no? We understand you need storage for stormwater, but we don't think that's appropriate use of Lake Bluff Park District facilities or space. And the answer to that is, yeah, the Stormwater Management Commission hopes that the park district will work jointly towards a solution for stormwater storage that is in the best interest of the park district, but there is no legal authority to force the park district to comply with a request of the Stormwater Management Commission. They've got some fine print here that you can read. And Julie, if you think that's important for us to study about what, if other entity may deal with the stormwater conveyance issues, we can look at that separately. But the answer is, in layman's term, the park district can say no, which I think is an important threshold. Number 3 and number 4 deal with something that we've talked about now in various guises. It's the 40 acre feet. And I think as a task force, we believe that number is insufficient based on what we know of the environment that north of the park district. Number 3 suggests, and this was discussed during our last meeting, that 40 acre feet is based on old data. It's based on old FEMA flood data. And this is required. They have to use the old FEMA data in the permitting, in the permit process, because the regs haven't allowed them to update the number. But our recommendation, well, I think we should ask the stormwater management folks, what is that number? Using updated FEMA numbers, 40 acre feet goes up by how much? 10%? I think we have a rough number of 10% or maybe a little bit more, because I think we want to give the Park District Board a realistic, not short-term myopic view, but a long-term generational view. 50 years from now, this should still be a solution. We don't want to come back in 10 years and say, oops, we need more storage. So that's one piece of this puzzle, is because of the increase in rainfall and climate change, what factor does the 40 acre feet increase by? Dangling participle.
Steve?
Yeah.
Steve? Yeah, it's my understanding that depending on how this is analyzed by the commission, that the number could be as high as an additional 25 to 30%.
Yeah, and
so it's not 10. It's potentially significantly greater than that.
Yeah, and the SMC folks say analysis can be performed, and I think we should ask them, Jan, to perform that so that we know what it should be adjusted, even if it's a range, but at least we need to know what that is. Number 4 comes at this from same issue from 2 different perspectives. So that is, we know that the area under consideration in their study, their H&H study, was the Route 41 corridor from Buckley Road to Rockland Road. And their assumption, all of their stormwater storage assumptions are based on a no net increase in the volume of stormwater that would be flowing into the park district from that catchment area. It would simply come into the catchment area faster. And that's why we need 40 acre feet or more of storage. So recognizing, life and recognizing the realities of life, we think there needs to be two more adjustments to the 40 acre feet. One is to deal with a potential increase in rainfall through the 21st century. And that's another climate change. That's a measurable formula that can be used to adjust from current state to the middle or the end of the 21st century. And there's a model apparently by the Illinois State Water Survey. And then the third is the increase in urbanization in the watershed. So the degree to which urbanization upstream, not just in the study area, but all the way up in the Skokie River area, increased urbanization in that area is likely to increase stormwater flow and is likely to result in additional pressures on the stormwater storage if that is designed and in place in the golf course. So the answer to that question essentially is yes, we can model both the increase in rainfall due to climate change and the increase in utilization because of urbanization of the watershed. And we can do that, and I would suggest we ask them to. So the 40 acre feet will then, as a result of the answers to 3 and 4, be increased by the new FEMA flood levels and will be increased by the estimate of increased urbanization and the increase due to climate change, for want of a better term. Okay.
Steve, do we have any idea when the FEMA flood levels and that are going to be updated?
They've already been updated. It's just that the permitting agency, which I assume is the Corps of Engineers, according to SMC, the permitting agency by regulation has to use a certain standard. I assume so they're consistent across their portfolio of projects. So until those are changed, the contractual relationships to determine the wetland bank will use certain standards, even though we know that those standards need to be adjusted.
Wow.
No comment, but
Yeah,
that's okay.
The village is already considering the updated standards in its future considerations for stormwater management within the confines of the village of Lake Bluff.
Yeah, so just to put this in common terminology, we want to use the most recent numbers and the most recent projections for maximizing the potential storage that will be needed in 50 years. Whatever is available to us today, we want to give the Park District Board the best estimate of what needed attention would be in a generation from now. And that's what these are really all about. And question 5 asks the specific questions. Have you looked at this is trying to answer the question of, well, how much storage would you build on the Park District property, which is code for how much wetland cover would you be able to build and pay for. And their answer is they haven't actually looked at a maximum. They've looked at the 40 acre feet because that's what's needed to, what they say, hold the line. And they would welcome, additional storage, stormwater storage as part of this activity and proposal. And question 6 is the same question, just in a different way. The storage area needs to be connected hydrologically to the Skokie River. So it could cover a fairly significant area. For those of us who know what the purple map is, right? It's the map that shows the potential wetland areas in the golf course property. That would be all considered as potential wetland. Question 7 is asking the question as to whether or not the SMC, and this is one of the key questions that was asked of the park board to us. It asks whether SMC and their services will include all services necessary and typical for such projects, stormwater projects, including site selection, design, engineering, permitting, construction, replanting, etc. And the answer is yes. So that does mean that if the Park District Board approves the creation of stormwater storage on the golf course property, that SMC and their personnel would manage, to use a parallel here, would manage the part of the process that was done by Land and Water Resources, Inc. For the Atkinson Road project in Libertyville. So the SMC would fulfill that management, design, engineering, construction, replanting work at no cost to the Park District. And I pause there because was one of the questions that specifically we were asked to confirm. The only thing that wouldn't be covered is maintenance. Number 8. So this is a question, again, it's getting to the can an 18-hole golf course and stormwater storage coexist on the existing Park District facilities? And if it can, and if a number, I think I used 3 or 4 holes of the golf course would need to be disturbed in order to build storage, would the SMC, as part of their work, rebuild the disrupted portions of that golf course? And their answer, while long, essentially says, if we're disturbing an existing golf course and building storage, we will put the golf course back on top, but we will not provide design or re-engineering of the golf course. So if it goes back generally, if the hole goes back generally the way it was before the storage was built, that's okay. But if the design includes reconfiguring the golf course, then most likely the stormwater management folks, they would certainly look carefully at what part of that they would pay, and most likely that a portion of that would have to be paid by the Park District.
So hypothetically, if they're cutting soil in a certain area to create a wetland area, that instead of trucking that soil off, they could relocate it on the property somewhere in the form of maybe raising fairways up, things of that nature.
Perhaps, and the last sentence here sort of says SMC can provide a better answer if specific location, areas, or concept plans are provided. So to the degree, yeah, that they're going to move dirt from one place and they can keep it on site rather than truck it away, they'd be happy to work with it. So the answer is it depends on what the ultimate design of that reconfigured golf course would look like.
Yeah, the cost of a 16-wheeler hauling dirt is a big price tag. So,
yeah, and if the alternative is you put it in the shovel and you just move the tractor over and you dump it, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So number 9. So this question essentially is, if the Park District agrees to have stormwater storage and wishes to reconfigure the golf course property as much as possible into a wetland eligible for wetland credits, would the Stormwater Management Commission staff also take over that responsibility? And the answer to that is that the right question? but I think that's right. The answer, I'm losing my train of thought here. The answer to that is yes, SMC will provide assistance to construct the wetlands. So they describe having people on staff that can do all of the things that the Land and Water Resources Inc. people did, or that V3 does, if the Park District would, so choose to use them. And again, it's part of the deal without an additional cost. Question 10, what other additional costs should we consider? And the biggest one is maintenance, monitoring, and we talked with Kathleen about controlled burns, removing of cattails, and other things. That's the biggest long-term, and that is a forever cost. So it's not, it's, every year or every couple of years, there's an expenditure. In the big scheme of the construction, it's not a big deal, but in the perpetuity of that expense, it is. And it's something we'll have to analyze. Question 11 asks for a timeline, and the answer is, well, we want the planning to get done as soon as possible. I think we know from our case studies that from the time somebody says yes until a permit is granted so that you can build the wetland, we're looking at a couple of years. And then from that point, we're looking at 5 to 7 more years after that. So they would prefer to get this going as soon as possible because they've got money, they've got grant funding, they've got money from the, I think it's the Build Illinois program, capital improvement program, a huge chunk of which is dedicated to stormwater management in Lake County. And that's number 12. So there is money appropriated for this, not specific project, for exactly this project. And if the Park District wants to do this, the recommendation is that they should get in the queue as soon as possible. And number 13 is essentially what's the form of the agreement and who's involved. If you remember, the H&H study had an intergovernmental agreement with, I think, 7 entities. And the stormwater management folks believes that the most efficient method here is an intergovernmental agreement, an IGA, between SMC and the Park District, making it a leaner agreement and much easier to manage. George, do you have any additional, or John, you were part of the conversation, any additional comments on our discussion with the folks?
I think you covered it pretty well.
Well done.
Okay. So I'm going to bring up the question again. To what degree do people believe that we need to do more research on the stormwater management proposal before we begin to draft the first part of our report?
I wish we had a little better sense of the top end of what they can cover.
We can attempt, you mean the maximum number of acres that they would move dirt?
Acres or dollars, or however that works out. So they have funding, but I'm sure they don't have infinite funding. And they need 40 acre feet. We say that we probably should increase that by about 25%. But, what if just hypothetically we said, okay, we want to turn the entire property or as much of it as is feasible into wetland? That would cost significantly more than, doing it with 40 acre feet. So I guess I would just, I don't want to try and pin anybody down to any precise costs at this point, but surely their funding is not infinite. And I'd like to know sort of in rough terms how much they would be able to cover if we decided to, really go in whole hog.
Sure, I think we can accomplish that by asking them for their adjustment. There are 3 adjustments that need to be made to the 40 acre feet. It's the updated FEMA charts, it's the urbanization of the watershed, and it's the effect of climate change. And to the degree, and they said they can do those calculations, so to the degree that they increase 40 acre feet by whatever percentage that would be, we can then ask the specific question, is this covered fully as if this would so it's not a question of converting the property into a wetland, because they are very specific when they have said that the ultimate use of the land, as long as it is it's ecologically consistent with stormwater management, which a storage facility and a wetland both are. It doesn't matter to them what the ultimate top solution on the land is. It doesn't matter. So the question, so it's not a stormwater storage facility or a wetland. It's yes to that. It's how much of that. If I make myself clear there, they have been very. We haven't asked the question specifically. We can do it. We have updated statistics. I think there's also a maximum conceivable area that could be converted into wetlands, which we will know, and we'll get to that topic because we have discussed that with V3, and we'll get to that next.
Okay.
So I hear you, and I think we'll have some answers, and certainly our draft wouldn't be formal or published until we get an idea of that answer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anybody else?
Steve, for looking back at this document, should it be edited to take out the words detention and retention and replace them with stormwater?
No, we could, but I think we just reflect in our minutes today that we recognize, as we learn more about this issue, we recognize that the appropriate terminology is stormwater storage, and we'll use that going forward. I think that's fine. And certainly in our report, we'll have the right terminology in there.
I'm going to summarize these responses as my key points for this meeting, and I will, in that document, use storage.
Perfect.
Instead of detention or retention.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to suggest, if there are no objections, that I will take a stab at drafting the initial response to the first part of our remit, which is the stormwater management proposal. Try to answer the 8 or 9 specific questions that the Park District Board had in that remit. I will work with Nikki and Julie on getting the language right, and then if we can get if we're comfortable along with John with a draft, then we'll send it out to this group for discussion in 2 weeks. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank me after I've written that. Let's see. Okay, just a quick update on the educational seminar. It's 8 to 11, I think, Thursday morning. If anybody is interested, there are 4 presenters, one of which is Highland Park. It's all around wetlands and stormwater management, and I'm going to have it on either as background or really concentrate, depending on what I'm actually hearing. But I'll be listening, and I can report back at the next meeting. Okay, task force member reports. George, can you, George and John and I also had a discussion with V3. And George, can you just quickly summarize what we asked for a proposal? John hasn't had a chance to review it yet, so I don't want to, have too much detail, but George, can you give a high level of what he's thinking about?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Steve, I didn't know you were going to ask me to comment on that. I don't have that report in front of me, but essentially they're giving us a proposal with a max limit of $10,000 expenditure to essentially cross-check the SMC presentation. See if what SMC is telling us does make sense. That our understanding that would include a bit of field reconnaissance to get some sort of backup on actual soil conditions. As if we all recall, the presence of hydric soils is a key factor in determining how much land area can be converted to wetlands. And they're indicating that once we give them the go-ahead, that they can do the work in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
A really nice short turnaround.
Yeah. So, sorry, George, but I've got it in front of me. I know you're looking for it. So specifically, V3 is proposing that they're going to answer these 3 questions. Can the proposed compensatory floodplain storage be provided in conjunction with the existing 18-hole golf course? So looking at the threshold question of can there be coexistence from their engineering perspective? Second question, what is the maximum number of wetland mitigation acres / credits that can be provided on the entire golf course property? Another threshold question, because revenue is determined by the number of compensable credits times the price per credit. And if we can get an independent analysis of how many credits can be carved out of the property maximum and where they're located on a map, we're a long way to helping to figure out what the financial and technical feasibility of this project is. And then the third, can both the floodplain storage and the proposed wetland mitigation bank be accomplished on the property? So can you actually have storage and a wetland on the same property? It's a question I hadn't thought about until we talked with V3 last week. So John, we'll talk this week, and hopefully we can get this process up and running. And if we're lucky, not next meeting, but the meeting after, we might have some results that would help us greatly in answering some of the questions that we have. And I want to thank George, both for working with V3 and for working with SMC and asking some of the questions that need to be asked. I want to thank Mark for all the case studies. Do you have anything else to add with that, Mark, or still looking?
No, thank you.
So you're going to become a tour manager soon?
Pardon?
Could I ask you to clarify something? I'm sorry, I think I just interrupted you, Mark.
I just asked if Mark was going to become our tour guide.
Absolutely.
All right.
But truthfully, I would say get back with Steve if you have individually, if you have an interest in going and doing a field trip, whether it's at the park district itself, in Highland Park or Addison, if there's any place else or any of the properties that Libertyville Township has, and it's easy for me to say I'm retired, but many of you don't have quite that flexibility, but I'm certainly interested in it. And if you are too, then let's get on about the business of trying to get some of that scheduled. And if 1 or 2 sites are more interesting to you than others, let's cover those. And
Nikki?
I wanted to just ask you to clarify something, Steve.
Sure.
It was your third question, I think, that you were hoping that V3 would answer for us. And I believe you said it was whether storage and wetlands can coexist. Is that correct?
Yes.
But in a sense, wetlands are storage. So are you thinking that we would have like detention / retention ponds as storage separate from wetlands?
I think the question that they're trying to answer here is whether the required storage, the number of acre feet of storage, can be efficiently spread over a wetland surface rather than in a pond.
Okay, so in other words, would wetlands be enough, or would you also need to have a pond, and can you do both?
Yeah, and that a lot will depend on the hydric nature of the soil. You know, so it's a soil composition as well as a strategy for where the wetland goes.
Okay, and maybe I'm opening a whole different can of worms here, but we have heard a little bit about stream mitigation, and I wonder if that's another potential means of storage. I haven't read anything about stream mitigation, so I don't know what that would mean, whether it would be broadening the channel that's there or, you know, what that would consist of. But I just wonder if we should be considering that as another piece of this, perhaps instead of a pond or something.
I believe that V3 will. Yeah, so one of the things they'll be doing is a landscape characteristic evaluation, which will look at wetland and or stream mitigation banks. So they're going to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Rob is going to be working on golf course finances for 2 weeks. So we'll have a study of golf course finances and some comparability of golf courses locally. Al is still working on maps. Anything else from the task force members? In terms of chairperson report, I talked about the draft for our next meeting. We talked about the V3 bid, the SMC discussion. I do have just one reminder to all the task force members. We are subject to the Open Meetings Act of Illinois. So that means that we cannot have private communications, either face-to-face or telephonic or email, that include a majority of a quorum, more than a majority of a quorum. So that means 2 of us can discuss issues and exchange emails, but not 3. So don't ever hit reply all, please. And if you're wanting to communicate with one other task force member, don't copy me, copy John instead, and John will send it off to the necessary people.
You can always blind copy some of the other task force members. That's okay, but just can't copy.
Okay.
I think that's probably following the letter of the law and not the spirit, maybe. I'm not sure that's.
Well,
Yeah.
it prevents them from hitting reply all. And then,
Yeah.
so if we want to send information out to all of you, we could do that. And then, you know, if we blind copy, you know, the rest of the task force members, then we don't, you know, risk breaking that OMA or having a violation.
Okay, I think it's the distinction between conveying information and then actually discussing that information. So you're right.
Yeah. So let's just be aware of that. We've done a good job so far. We'll keep it up. Nikki, anything else on the recap of facts? You'll get a document out for us at the next meeting. Emily, anything from a board liaison perspective?
No, but I just had a question about that V3 report. Was there, I know that you were looking at the proposal. Did I hear was a maximum of 10,000, but there wasn't a final price on that?
It's a not to exceed of 10,000 based on hourly.
Okay.
Hourly. John hasn't looked at it, so I'm sure after he reviews it, he'll send a copy to, around to you and take a look at.
Okay.
And then hopefully whoever can sign that thing can sign it and we can get going. Or if not, we, have a discussion.
Okay. Nothing to report. Thanks.
John, anything?
I think we've covered it, covered everything from the staff perspective. We do have one of the guests that has their hand up.
Okay, great.
George Helmer.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot. Hey, one last question. I appreciate it. Good discussion today. I think, Steve, you mentioned something at the end about kind of trying to bookend. I think you wanted to bookend some of the options, right? One was, hey, about accommodating the number of credits or how much storage the SMC is requesting but you also implied wanting to see how you could, what's the maximum that the property could provide. And my only question was, isn't that beyond the remit of this task force, which I thought was to respond to the request presented to us by, or you all, or us, and as a community on to SMC. And it wasn't about looking at an alternate use to the existing golf course. It was, hey, we've been asked to provide a certain amount of storage, and let's address that question. I don't know, is that going above and beyond what the remit is? It's just a question for you all.
Yeah, I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. First, because we don't know the actual number of acre feet that storage will be required. We've heard 25% from one of the three factors. It's conceivable it could be 50, 60 acre feet. So until that number is settled, it seems prudent to understand what our maximum holding capacity would be. And actually, we're looking at, because of a design considerations, we're also looking at where wetlands could easily go based on the soil composition. So the process of looking at maximizing is just one end of a strategy map. One end is do nothing, one end is maximum, and then there's a whole series of considerations to fulfill both parts of our remit. One part of which is understanding the SMC proposal, which part of which is what's the maximum storage you need. The other part of it is looking at the financial, the feasibility of stormwater credits and what the financial impact of the park district would be. And that requires a look at what the at least an analysis of what the maximum might be, to give the park district the information they need to make an informed decision, and to give, folks like us, the community, the information they need to make an informed decision as well. But we'll keep looking at it and keep looking at options and alternatives and keep discussing them in public and looking for feedback from folks like you. Any other comments or questions?
No, sir.
Okay, so next meeting is in 2 weeks, and our major items will be the golf course financials and hopefully the first draft of the part 1 of our remit, and discussion on both of those. And if there's nothing else, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Someone needs to have a motion, a second.
Second. If I didn't
All in
move, I'll
favor?
second.
Signify by aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? 9:01. Thank you all very much. Good meeting again.
Thanks. Good meeting. Thank you all.
Good night.
And
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
we'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right.